So we talked about how animals, including humans, can evolve to be kind, to be altruistic towards genetic relatives, and the influence that this has on our psychologies. But our kindness and altruism isn't limited to those we share our genes with. We're also kind to non-kin. So looking at non-humans, we see animals groom themselves, they give warning cries, they share in the task of childcare, they share food, and so on. And certainly in both everyday life and in the hunter-gatherer life of our past, we're kind to one another. We form groups and we help one another. In your everyday life, you're probably connected to people, to friends, to romantic partners who you don't share genes with, and yet you have a mutual and kind relationship with. You're actually also probably, to some regards, kind to strangers. And how that comes about is kind of a different story. But we're going to stick to friends. And so one way of thinking about the relationships between friends is in terms of what the biologist Robert Trivers has called reciprocal altruism. There's a principle where we're more likely to help those who help us. If you scratch my back, I scratch yours, and there's mutual benefit. Suppose we need to drag in something, maybe a carcass, from one place to another, and we both benefit from having it moved, but neither one of us is individually strong enough to move it. If we work together, we both benefit. Or, to take a more difficult case, suppose whenever I get a surplus of food, I give you some, and whenever you get a surplus of food, more than you can eat, you give me some. We both benefit from this. But there's a problem. The problem is the problem of cheating. What if I help you on Tuesday and you don't help me back on Wednesday? And we're actually back to the free rider problem. In an animal context, imagine the case of warning cries. So some animals, if one of them in a group sees some sort of predator approaching, will give off a loud cry to warn everybody else. And that's to the benefit of the group. Overall, everybody is best off if the creatures in that group give warning cries. But you know who would really be best off? Somebody who took advantage of the warning cries, who listened to them and responded, but actually didn't give them themselves. Imagine a gene that led animals to both give warning cries and respond to warning cries, and a second gene that led an animal to respond to warning cries but not give warning cries. The selfish free rider gene would outproduce the more generous gene. It would have all of the benefits and none of the costs, and pretty soon the whole group would be worse off. So again, we see a similar case where this sort of reciprocal altruism appears to be untenable. There is, however, a solution. Reciprocal altruism can evolve if animals can punish cheaters, can punish free riders. And punishment can be actually kind of whapping them in the head or causing them pain or killing them, but it could also be shunning them. In a situation where animals need to interact with other animals to survive, shunning is a powerful punishment. And so the claim is that you find this sort of kindness among non-kin, among non-related individuals, if the animals have evolved a corresponding mechanism for punishment, which requires a lot of psychological apparatus, a lot of cognitive machinery. These animals have to recognize cheaters, they have to remember who they are, and hold this memory across time, and have to be motivated to punish. One very general way to see the situation and to see how the situation can be solved is what's known as a prisoner's dilemma. So here's the logic of the prisoner's dilemma. It's incredibly cool, but we need to walk through it. So imagine you and a friend commit a crime, and you're arrested. And you and your friend are put into separate rooms, you're prisoners. And a police officer comes up to each one of you separately, and he says, look, you have two options. You can cooperate with your friend, which means you say nothing, you don't squeal on your friend, you don't blame your friend, or you can defect. And the police officer says, if you defect, you say, yes, we did it, and it was all his fault. So if you cooperate with your friend and your friend cooperates with you, you both get a fairly mild sentence. You get a 1 year in prison. They can't pin the whole crime on you, but they have some other evidence and so on. If, however, you squeal on your friend and your friend keeps his mouth shut, you go free. You just walk away. If you cooperate with your friend and he squeals on you, you're in big trouble, man. Your friend will walk away and you will spend the rest of your life in prison. If you both squeal on each other, you'll each get a very long prison sentence. So the police officer says, so look at this and be aware that your friend is looking at the same sheet and making the same choices. And while, of course, in real life, they don't actually explain to you the prisoner's dilemma, this actually is not so different from what actually happens when people are arrested for crimes, often for serious crime. They really will be put in a separate room and be told, look, give up on your friend and you'll get a lesser sentence. And they'll say, and I'll tell you, your friend's getting the same offer. Whichever one acts first wins. And it's a matter of trust, really. If you trust your friend, and you know he won't defect on you, and he trusts you, and know you won't defect on him, you'll both cooperate. But the cop says, I want you to observe something really interesting about your options. Suppose he cooperates with you. What's the best option for you? What will turn out best for you? Well, if he cooperates, that's the top two squares. Your best thing for yourself is to defect. That's the upper right corner. Then you walk away. Suppose he defects on you. Well, what's your best option? Your best option, again, is to defect. You'll get 20 years in prison, but that's better than life in prison. And so when faced with this option, you say, fine, I defect. I'm going to squeal on my partner. He gets the same option, and then he squeals on you. And so this is a weird and unhappy outcome. And here's a way to phrase the prisoner's dilemma more abstractly. The best case is to defect while the other person cooperates. The worst case is to cooperate when the other person defects. The best overall is if each cooperate. And the worst overall is if both defect. The puzzle is, as the police officers reminded you, regardless of what your opponent does, you're better off defecting, but if both people defect, both are worse off. Now, once you start hearing about a prisoner's dilemma, you see it everywhere. Imagine my wife and I decide to divorce, and we each struggle separately with the option of getting an expensive and carnivorous divorce lawyer. And so, plainly I think, and she thinks, if we just go to mediation, we'll split our money and we'll both do okay. But then something occurs to me. If I choose yes to getting a carnivorous and expensive divorce lawyer, and she chooses no, I'll get everything. And she'll lose everything. Very tempting. Also, I worry. If she gets a lawyer and I don't, I lose everything. And she gets everything. Faced with the logic, it seems inevitable that we both get expensive lawyers. We have a lengthy court battle, and we both do pretty badly. You have two countries, and they're deciding whether or not to build up their weapons and their military, which is very expensive. And they both decide no. And they say, that's okay, not bad. But then it occurs to them that if one country chooses yes and the other one chooses no, the one who chooses yes really gets everything. They can invade the other country. And the one who chooses no is in a very bad situation. So faced with this logic, they both choose yes. And then they both do pretty badly. Prisoners' dilemmas are everywhere. Now, there may be no solution to the one-shot prisoner's dilemma, where you deal with another individual who's a stranger. You just interact once and you make your choice. But now imagine that you get to play the prisoner's dilemma game over and over and over again with a certain individual. what's the best strategy? What's the best strategy for the maximum payoff? And you could even think about this for a moment. Would you always defect? Would you always cooperate? Would you be random? What would you do? Many years ago, the scholar Robert Axelrod put together a competition. And the competition involved people participating by bringing in computer programs, establish different strategies for solving the prisoner's dilemma. And the idea is that each of the programs would play multiple games. And what's really cool is that the winning program was extremely simple. It was actually 4 lines of computer code. It was the simplest program that they had. And it worked on a principle. It was developed by Anatol Rappaport. And it worked on a principle called tit for tat. And it just had 2 very simple rules. The first is, the first time you meet a new program, cooperate. And the second is, after that, do on each trial what the other program did on the previous trial. And you see, this has a sort of genius to it. It's nice. It starts friendly. It's not a sucker. If it starts friendly and you defect on it, it will then defect back. But it's forgiving. Once you're nice, it's going to be nice right back. It basically rewards niceness with niceness and meanness with meanness. And it's transparent. The logic of it's clear enough that it's easy to figure out how to work together for mutual gain. If I'm going to play with a tit-for-tat machine for a long series of games, I will just cooperate all the time because I know my cooperation will be rewarded with cooperation. And what's really cool is evolutionary psychologists have pointed out that our social emotions, how we deal with other people, seem to be calibrated to different aspects of the prisoner's dilemma. So we feel gratitude and liking for people who cooperate with us, which motivates us to be nice to them in the future. We feel anger and distrust of those who betray us, which motivates us to betray or avoid them in the future. And we feel guilt when we betray someone who cooperates with us. And this motivates us to behave better in the future. And here it is, lined up in terms of the different parameters of the prisoner dilemma options, which is, I think, a beautifully elegant way of how evolutionary considerations and game theoretic considerations on the evolution of cooperation can actually provide some really interesting insight into the nature of our emotions and the nature of our psychology more generally.